Given its vast young population and enormous talent pool, how can India and its students play a greater role in the world of education on the global stage? That's what we are looking at today, a very special panel with us. Thanks all so much for taking our time to speak to us. With us is now the Vice-Chancellor of Deakin University, Jane D. Orlando. Also, the others joining her are Ravneet Pava, Mike Ewing, Gary Smith, and Brenda Cherednichenko. Thanks again for being with us. Jane, first I'd like to ask you, increasingly, Indian students are going abroad like never before. Now, of course, in record numbers, new records being breached every year. What do you believe are the key boxes that Indian students are ticking for international universities and vice versa?
Good question. Well, I think for one reason many countries are looking at India is, of course, the rise of India and India's position in the world and starting to be a very significant democracy. Certainly, the growth this year was the fastest growth, I think, in the world. And anyone who's got any sense, any other jurisdiction would say, this is a power we need to deal with. Right. That's the first thing. Secondly, the students we get are very good students. So the education system for the students we get is exceptional. Certainly for Deakin, and I can speak for Deakin and a number of other universities I've worked at, the students we get, of course, the English language skills are very good because you are that kind of country. They understand our rule of law and governance and government because they've lived under a similar system in India. Right. And then they're well educated. They are clever, they win prizes, they do extraordinarily well. Right. At Deakin.
Right, Jane, and I still haven't got started about cricket and all of that, of course, and Bollywood, not to mention Bollywood, yes.
I wasn't going to go to the war, which is cricket. So we love Indian students when we're winning. We can get slightly tense with them when we're losing. Right. What is interesting is when we play the Ashes against the British, right, the Indians support us. And when the Indians are playing the British, we support the Indians. So we are united at the hip on the serious matters.
Right, absolutely. In recent years, we've been wondering whether the glass is half full or half empty in the space of education in India. You've had several partnerships. How do you see it playing out?
We've formed a relationship with the Indian School of Business. It's widely regarded that they would be in the top 2 or 3 business schools in the entire Eastern Hemisphere of the world. They're a world-class institution, as good as anybody on earth. And we've formed a very productive, mutually beneficial relationship with them. So we see that relationship as the focal point for Deakin Business School's interaction with Indian students and academics in terms of a genuine two-way partnership. It's not a transactional thing where we're trying to recruit students. Right. It's a genuine two-way partnership. Right. And that relationship's been in place for over a year now and is working really well for us.
Right. Gary, it's the focus on research that, for me personally, when I sort of look at universities abroad and I see the point that Mike made earlier, just look at the top researchers, or look at their contribution, and many of them are going to be Indian in very different spheres. We back home often struggle with getting the right balance, and why haven't we focused on research? What more do we need to do? And there's a lot of talk, but many in India would say very little action when you sort of look at research and the possibilities around it. What would you say that a country like India needs to do to start working on that?
Well, from our perspective in Australia, there is fantastic research taking place in India, and some of our great research partners in India are highly valuable partners to us because they've got a deep research culture and active industry engagement associated with that research. So there is a lot going on. I think India obviously has a trouble holding the best because the best have a global market position. Yeah. You produce talent that is so good, they can go anywhere. So then the problem for the Indian government and authorities is how to hold the best in India, and that's the challenge.
The one thing every nation wants is you want your people to go away, look at the world, see a different way, and then come back and apply that in country. And you think of how some countries do that very well. Right. So Indians going to the Ivy League of the United States, to the top universities, universities in the UK and in Europe is no bad thing. What you want to do is what is the attractor to say, now come home and give back. I think many people always think of home as the place they had their formative years often, and they do come home. You think of how fast the economic growth of India, probably the time is now right for them to say, well, let's go and get the best of the best and bring them home, or at least get them coming home to make a contribution.
Brenda, the other big thing that we're looking at in this day and age is, of course, increasing student mobility, sending students from one part of the world to the other and getting their students to experience different countries. How key is that? How important is that? And how does that sort of help shape the modern student?
Well, first of all, I'd say it's extremely important for Deakin students to, picking up on Jane's point, to get a global view of the world and to have an experience outside their own home and their own home environment. Australian students don't often leave home to go to university in great numbers, so having that global experience is critical. For Indian students, I would argue it's exactly the same. Again, going back to that point about going out, learning from others, you know, gathering the best knowledge and experience you can and making it a part of your graduation experience or your educational experience. That's how you actually challenge the environment you're in and continue to use that questioning and challenging that you develop as a university student to drive innovation and change and improvement in your own environment when you come back.
Right. And that's, of course, Ravneet, how it also sort of plays in as far as an Indian student is concerned, because we know that they're not really out of their comfort zone for the longest time. They stay at home for longer years, and mum really usually does it all. So when they sort of move out, it is quite a culture shock.
Absolutely. And I think I think more and more you meet students that you can really tell that have been traveling, that have been connecting with the world, come back with a completely different perspective. And I think that's really important for the younger generation to be globally connected. You know, I also wanted to pick up the point on research. One of the things that is happening in India now, you see, is the Gyan program that the government has just introduced. And those are like small steps forward. But I think we've got a long way to go, you know, to create the culture of actually research creativity in our universities. You know, you talk to the best of the institution, you go to, you know, any top university or institution in India, the hunger seems to be lacking at an academic level and at a student level. You know, so I think the sense of complacency is getting to us, that, you know, we don't need anyone, we are good. You know, the world has moved on, you know, so we've got to be more connected. We've got to think about excellence in the world, and I think that's where India's challenge is, to be more open and to be able to see where do we see the best. And I think bringing people back is absolutely important, and institutions like ISB are starting to do that. So they are attracting the, you know, the best of the talent outside, giving them a conducive environment, space, and the mobility to move between the worlds, you know, like you don't, if you're in India, you're not just in India. So I think that's really important, yeah.
Taking from where you left off, Mike, you know, you ask a room full of the more privileged students who've had the best education in India, how many of them want to get into academics, how many of them want to teach? And I can bet that nobody will raise their hands, or one or two at best. So we are in that situation. This generation doesn't want to get into teaching. We're wondering, we already have, you know, a serious lack of teachers, quality teachers, trained teachers. So from where we are and where we want to be, or where we ought to be, where we believe we ought to be, how does one sort of leverage this? What are the kind of key government interventions or policies that we now need?
In terms of developing more academics.
Yes.
Yeah, look, I think that's a global phenomenon. That's not an Indian phenomenon. I mean, if you asked a class of undergraduates at Deakin, do any of you want to become business school professors? I would almost hope none would say yes. You would be worried if they did.
Right.
So I think,
is that worrying?
No, it's not worrying. It's not worrying. But you've got to have the pathways through the higher degree research programs. So through the honours programs, the master's programs, into the PhD programs. So maybe by the end of the honours degree, a few are starting to think about a career in research.
Okay.
By the master's degree, more are thinking. By the time they get into the PhD, they're starting to become committed to a career in research. So that's not a concern in and of itself. You know, I think, back to Ravneet's point though, the government policies need to focus on rewards and incentives to promote research at Indian universities, because there's no question you've got the brains, you've got the facilities, it just seems that the policies and the incentives are not entirely aligned.
Right.
So research doesn't appear to be valued to the same extent as it is in other parts of the world.
Right.
But the intellectual horsepower is there. It's the policies. And, the other reality, we live in a global labor market, and salaries for top researchers are determined in US dollars
Right.
around the world.
Right.
So there's going to have to be some
Sort of
structural adjustment
Right.
to the packages if you want to try and bring people back from,
Right.
other parts of the world.
Right. Gary, in the other big debate that we've been having in India is employment the ultimate goal of an education? We're talking about that a lot because we are seeing students who are not really pursuing courses or studying what they would like to or where they believe that their real passion lies, but they're sort of going after the big banner headlines and so got a campus placement of, this big salary, this big pay packet, and sort of we have too many chasing similar dreams where they may or may not really be the right fit.
Well, again, I think this is a global phenomenon. This is what many young people are doing. We certainly, more and more employment is an important goal, and at the same time students pursue many other goals while they're a student, and they have interests they pursue which are very employment oriented and interests which are not. But I think Jane once said that a university is a train station on the way to a job,
Right.
and that we have to pay a lot of attention to assisting the employment aspirations of our students. We can't ignore it, we have to facilitate it, and we have to put effort into it. So it is a serious concern that young people have. And many Indian students who come to Australia, they're very job focused.